The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Kellenberger, and I'm co-leader of the Women in Technology virtual group for PASS. Our group is all about encouraging each other, mentoring each other, and I have a special interest in helping women get started speaking and helping them get to that next level. And that's kind of what our sessions are about, really promoting women speakers, whether it be a technical topic or a topic especially interesting to women. Thanks to Redgate, who is sponsoring our webinar today, one of you will receive a $100 Amazon gift card by attending today. You'll receive an email from our WIT chapter letting you know if you are the winner. Thanks, Redgate. We have recordings of almost every one of our sessions out on our YouTube channel, and you'll find links to everything we do on our homepage. Be sure to join our virtual group if you haven't already to get our monthly newsletter, and follow us on Twitter as well. We have quite a few sessions scheduled out, and we also like to promote women who are speaking for other groups. One thing that I do need to mention is that we had originally had Heather Ritchie's session scheduled for the following week, but because of some travel that she has, we had to move it to a different week. We really wanted to keep it in March because this month we're having 3 sessions to celebrate Women's History Month. We've got Kaylin next week, and then a couple days later we've got Heather Ritchie. And Heather is the speaker who was the keynote at our 2017 Women in Technology luncheon at PASS Summit. So whether you got to see her or not, be sure to check it out. And of course, Kaylin Delaney is a fantastic speaker and one of the most knowledgeable people in SQL Server. And just go out to our site, and we list all of the webinars coming up, as well as promoting a lot of webinars for other groups as well. There are many SQL Saturdays coming up, and lots of women speaking at these SQL Saturdays. Again, you can find a list out on our site. So we've got several speakers in Cincinnati, coming up, Phoenix, quite a few. I usually make it to Phoenix. This year I didn't make it. Chicago is also that same weekend, and Rochester, and Colorado Springs. It looks like that's it for the rest of the month, and quite a few there. I can't really call out individual ones because there are just so many. So today, we're going to talk about establishing a baseline with Lowry, now I'm going to mess your name up, Lowry, I'm sorry, Kozlowski. And before I turn it over to her, I want to talk to you about asking questions. Please feel free to ask questions by entering them into the little question box, and Lowry will go ahead and answer them throughout the session. So be sure to put the questions there. So this session today is about establishing a baseline, especially if you have gotten a new job or suddenly became the new accidental DBA, and she's going to tell us about which things to monitor, which things to baseline. And it's really important so that you know as things change, if it really was a change or if that was expected behavior. So Lowry has been a DBA for over 16 years, and she's focused exclusively on SQL Server for the past 11 years. She currently works as a DBA consultant, and she does great work for her clients, improving the SQL Server performance. And she also speaks regularly at Dominican University to inspire new DBAs and let them know what being a DBA is like. So I'm going to turn this over to Lowry, and she can take it from there. I'm going to unmute her, and make her the speaker. Okay.
Hi, everybody. How are you today? This is Lowry Kozlowski, and we are going to be talking about SQL Server takeover, establishing a baseline. When I became a new DBA, I didn't know what a baseline was. Everybody talks about it, so I've kind of developed this kind of metrics over the years. As Kathy said, I am a SQL consultant focused on SQL DBA. I am also the co-chapter leader for the Chicago Suburban SQL User Group. This is the information. And when I first started working on it, I had a mentor that always would tell me that the server will do exactly what you tell it to do, but it may not be what you want, which is why this is very appropriate for support. Understand that the computer's doing exactly what it's told to, but it may not be what you think it's doing. So when I get started, we're going to talk about why you want to baseline a system, our goals and the tasks that you want to do, what you want to prepare for storage. You would want to create a repository. In my case, and then I want to go into the SQL databases. And then we want to analyze the information to plan for next steps. So today's goal is not to make any changes. When you get into the system and you start seeing issues, you may want to start fixing right away. Stop and gather the information. That's not the goal of what you're doing. You want to understand what's going on in the system before you start making changes, because that'll affect all the metrics that you're going to get. We're going to gather the information quickly, make sure it's low impact on the system, because sometimes the systems we're reviewing, they're having performance issues and we don't want to add to the issue. We're going to create a repository database and have it put in place, the data that we're gathering, so we can get trending and get a history of the data. We're going to gather an OS details so we understand what we can fix and what we're limited on. We're going to baseline your disk I/O and get the current SQL metrics, and then use that information to plan the changes. So why baseline your systems? Sometimes you think you have a solid brick wall and it's holding up the building, but when you look deeper, there's gaps in the wall, there's mortar missing. Baseline the system. So you want to prepare your documentation. You want to identify the servers and scope. Are these production? Are they dev? Are they QA? What's the purpose of them? Create some documentation. The server names, as much information, IP, domain. Some organizations have multiple domains, a dev, QA, and production. If your organization is all in the same domain, then you don't have to worry about that. Identify which are the most critical systems. Those are the ones you want to use the most care on, and make sure to let people know when you are working on these systems. Understand the requirements for backup and recovery, because now you have ownership of the system. If something goes bad and it fails, you want to make sure everything's backed up. There's usually a DBA database that we're going to create, and is it going to exist on each system or one server, or multiple? Is there going to be a database on one system and a master repository on another server? Verify you have access to all systems and instances. You want to make sure you are a sysadmin on the SQL instance and an administrator on the SQL server. You do not have to be domain admin necessarily, but you do have to have administrator rights on the server. Any questions so far?
No questions yet.
All right. So the metrics we want to gather are the function of the system, what's it doing, what applications are running. We want to understand the server OS and hardware information. We want to know what the version is, if it's patched up, how much RAM and CPU is on it, and the disks, and disk sizes, space, and such information. We're going to look at the SQL instance. We want to look at the version. Is it patched? Is it configured? What SQL databases are in place and what their configurations are. So our first goal is to create a repository. We want to create a spreadsheet for gathering the server information, and it provides you a checklist, because as you go through a lot of systems, you may be jumping from one system to the other. If you have a checklist and you mark it off when you're going along, it keeps better track of it. Create a database to host the information. Create a repository on each server, or create a master repository on one system that you load up to, or a combination of a local repository and a master repository. So when you have to pull information, you just go to one source that you've been uploading data to for tracking. So we'll go into a demo. When I talk about the master repository, what I have here is a spreadsheet that I created, and you can put it across this way with the system, or you do a separate sheet for each server so you have that. And you want to just gather some basic information. This is the information I have found to be useful. Is it a QA test? Where is it located? Is it a physical virtual cloud? Are there any third-party apps to consider? This is kind of important because if it's a SharePoint or a dynamic server, there's certain requirements you cannot take a hold of. You want to know about any log shipping or anything, basic information of what's going on in those systems. The information you want to gather is you want to make sure that the SQL version, you have rights to the system, various information such as processes you want to run to gather the information, and a checklist of things you want to look at to be aware of. I know I have 32-bit here. Believe me, they're still out there. I'm still fighting to get some of those people off of SQL, 32-bit SQL. So that's what we want to gather. When we create the repository, what I have here is in my system, I have created a database, and I've called it Dba Repository. Our practice operates on VDBA, and I like that because it drops it down lower on the list so I can find my database. It's a little easier than in the middle of the list. I want to gather information on the database growth, the database file location, what the recovery information is for the SQL databases, drive sizes, any failing jobs, full backup information on when it occurs, what version of SQL, the agent jobs, and how SQL is configured. So I've already pre-created this, and because of time constraints, we're not going to run through creating this, but know that this is where I put it, and then you can easily script this out. I have scripts that you can use to create these, and you can adapt them to your needs. And use that to gather the information. So I'm now set up for getting my information ready. I have my spreadsheet and I have my documentation on where I'm going to load data. Any questions so far?
No questions at this point.
All right.
Oh, wait a minute. One just popped in.
Okay.
How can we get the scripts from you? So will you make those available?
I will make those available. I will work with Kathy to find a repository to get them sent out, and include the deck with it.
Okay, so we'll probably include it as an attachment to the webinar on our site. So there'll be the recording, link to the recording, as well as the materials. So, okay, thanks.
Okay, so the system information, we want to define which process to gather this information. There's two processes, and be aware that these are, some of these processes for getting the information are network intensive, and we would have to work with the network admins to gather the information. Microsoft has a tool called Assessment and Planning Toolkit, and it's good for gathering the information on multiple servers, but it takes some time and can have an impact on the network. So we're just going to briefly touch on it. I have links at the end in which you can download the map assessment and planning toolkit, and you can also sit there and run it and gather the information on the system. It's just a good inventory, but it's not going to get us all the information that I want to gather. So the other way to do it is to go to command line as administrator and get the systeminfo.exe, and you can get information on the current system that you're running or connect to another system in which you want to gather the information. On command line or PowerShell, what you can do is you can, instead of just doing systeminfo.exe, you can do a /s and put your server name, or it could be a remote server you want to get, and you have an option to do it as a file out as a CSV with systeminfo to a table or another tool. You can go in through Management Studio to collect the information, and this is the script to do that information. You have to activate Command Shell and deactivate Command Shell. I try not to leave Command Shell active on a system at all and only activate it for the processes that need it and then disable it. It's a security matter that I keep control of. So I'm going to show you several different ways to get this information. When I go to a command prompt, and in this one, I'm not running as administrator, but it will still work. If I trigger it, I will get the information, and it comes up in this format that's kind of useful, but it's kind of hard to export into another method. If I go into SQL Server, I run it the command way, it comes up in and it's usable, but it's not very pretty and not usable, not able to load it up into a table cleanly. I've worked on with one of my coworkers, we've come up with this format that you can sit there and import this data into a table so you have that information on all your systems in case you need to pull something out and you want to find out what the information is. And I include the client name, being a consultant, I need that information. My server name is LDK, and I get the information on this server. The key things I want to point out is, let me zoom in. In here, we have the total physical memory and the available physical memory running on the system. And then we also have the virtual memory in use and virtual memory available. That is some key information we will need to know for our baselining. Right now, my server and my memory usage is not very high on this. It's my laptop. I don't have a lot of processes running on it. But this will usually give you a guideline on where to go to start looking at troubleshooting. So that's why we have this kind of information. Any questions so far?
Not any right now.
Okay. The next base information I want to get on your system is the disk speed and the performance of the drive. There is a tool out there that replaces SQL I/O that's called Disks SPD, and I include a link that you can download it from on the back of this. And several people have written very good articles on how to analyze the disk speed and run it. I recommend Glenn Barry's article. The link is included. And this is his metrics for gathering the information on the disk speed and how to run it. We're going to run it in 8K partitions, which is what this 8K is. And we're going to do it for 60 seconds. And how many threads we're doing is 8. We want to do it for read and write with 25% and logging. We're going to use 1 gig of RAM, and we're going to create a 5 gig file, and we're going to write it to an output file on the C drive. It's going to create that 5 gig file application. And what I do is I have an output file that I call IO test, and I have it for the C drive, and I timestamp it for the date I run it. And I do that for each drive. I just change the parameters to go for, if I have a D drive, I'm going to change it to D drive and do a timestamp for that. That way we have metrics for when we ran it, and if any changes are made, once you work with the network admins, you can then get a second metric. So then you have a healthy baseline. Now this you definitely have to run as an admin. If you try running this without being an admin, it will fail. So in here is the script that I took from the site, and I just redate it, change the timestamp, and I will run this script then, and it's going to run for a minute. Okay, now it's running. What it does is it will create an output file in your disk speed folder with the current date. I'm going to open up a previous one. This is the one that's still running, so it's not current, but it will be loading to this. And what it does is it gathers you your information of the time span, how it's running, how long it reads. It lets you know your total performance of your average latency is 0.083, this value over here. 0.103 is your read IO, and 0.171 is your write latency. So you're going, all right, those are nice numbers. What do they mean? You don't know if that's a good baseline or a bad baseline. I will tell you right now, it's a good baseline. And the reason is I will show you a client's metrics that we were gathering from their systems. We were sitting there building out a system for a client, and the performance was horrible. It took me 3 hours to install SQL. So as a result, I did my baseline metrics. This baseline metrics for the total IO was 6.82 latency average. The read IO was 5.313, and the write latency was 11.343. So if you remember, my latency was definitely a lot faster with my write latency. It's 0.171, so it gives you clues something's going on. There's some other metrics down here that are showing you the total amount of milliseconds it takes to run the queries as it goes along. What we did was we worked with the network team to let them know of these issues, and then they went in and they did a magic fix. They told us they took IPv6 off, and that fixed the disk latency issue. We're not going to argue with our sysadmins. We want them on our side. So we brought to their attention, and then they said they fixed it. So to validate, we ran it the next day, and our average latency got reduced down to 2.83. The read latency was improved up to 3.125 milliseconds, and the write latency was dramatically improved down to 1.967. And the charts on the total milliseconds is definitely much improved. So this is why we want to get this information. We may not be able to fix it, but we can provide our network team with the information that they need to help you get this fixed. So this is the results for what I just ran. My latency is going to be slightly off from my previous run, but it's still within the same parameters. I'm on an SSD so I'm not going to have much performance issues. But it's information we want to gather, so we also have an understanding that if there's performance issues, there's some things we can do about it, but if there isn't, then we can work with the teams to improve what we can improve. Now, I know I just went a little deep with this one. So does anybody have any questions?
Yes. One question, how often should you run this?
I would be very cautious. I would want to run it. Again, this is an impact, so you want to schedule this for off hours, like the network team. Run it during the off hours, get your metrics, and set it so you can get it fixed, and then get your next metrics. I would then want to maybe schedule it for 6 months down the line, or if somebody else is seeing issues and it's degrading, then you want to get that again at that point in time. But again, this is an impact on the system, so schedule it for off hours.
Okay, I've got a question on the latency. Were the units seconds or milliseconds?
Some of them were milliseconds. Let me bring that back up. These were milliseconds on here, down here. These are megabytes a second, IO seconds, and bytes. So this is the latency in seconds. I think it's.
Well, that's.
I did say milliseconds.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's really bad.
It's really bad.
Really bad. Okay. Thanks. That's all for now.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That's why the network team did their magic fix and got that much improvement, a 10-time improvement. All right. When we were sitting there doing this, my client sent me, these are his systems. His front end is like the happy baby, but his back end systems are the zombie babies. And our goal is to avoid zombie babies everywhere on our environment. Now we're back to where we want to deal as DBAs, is we want to understand what the instance and database information are. We want to know what SQL version we're on, and if we're thoroughly patched. We want to know what the SQL configuration settings are. We want to make sure backups are occurring. We want to find out where our databases are located, our logs and data files on separate drives, is TempDB on a separate drive. Instead of going in and click and get that information, let's just run a script and get the information. We want to get some database details. And then we want to run our good friend Brent Ozar's SQL Blitz script, because it will give us some more information that maybe we need to dig deeper on. So if you haven't heard of SQL Blitz, it's a free tool that Brent Ozar puts out that you can sit there and run against your system, so you know more information on your system and where you might want to start looking for help. So we got our system information. We don't care about this anymore, so we will get that out of our way. And we want to get some information about our systems. One of the things we want to look at is our memory usage, because we've looked at that and we've gotten some information on the system. So what I did is I have a database I called DBA data, that maybe this is the one I want stored on everybody's system to get the metrics. I have created a table to get my information, the type of information I want, and a timestamp of when it occurs. That's very key, because I'm gathering this information every 5 minutes. I have a process that will sit there and gather the information and insert it into that table and pull the metrics from the memory counters and the page life expectancy and the memory usage. And then I create a job to sit there and run it. And then I have it set. Normally I will run this for a period of 1 week and then go back and review the data. Sometimes there's monitoring tools in place and it may not have the fine-tuning to get the information we want. For the detail we want, we may want it more often because we know we're having a problem. So I've got my database in place with my tables for my memory tracing. And I have a job down here that we have scheduled. I have it scheduled to occur every 5 minutes. You may want to do it a little more often or a little less often. For me, I find 5 minutes is a good parameter for gathering information. It's been running for a while, so I will go in and I will select the top 1,000 rows from my table, and it's giving me some metrics. Now, again, this is on my laptop, so everything's going to be all fine. And this is what the server memory is on the system. Let me zoom in. We have our server memory is 32 gig. We've got SQL figured to be using 30 gig, which is a red flag right in itself. But SQL is actually only using 948 megabytes of the RAM. And the page life expectancy is a very huge number. And I keep saying page life expectancy in seconds because you can take that and divide by 60 and know how many minutes it's running. And then we have a timestamp going. On a system that's running great and we're not running out of virtual memory, then we're doing good. What I've used this for is we were having some performance issues with the client and we were trying to trace what's going on. And at this particular client, this is how much RAM is on the system. But for some point during overnight hours, their SQL memory dropped down to only 2 gigs of use, and their page life expectancy dropped to 80 seconds. So when you look at something like this, you want to get an understanding of what's going on. This particular timing right here is they did a reboot of the server. So as you see, it takes a while for the SQL to get back up and use its memory and make use of it. The other time we were having issue is it was tracing down overnight hours in which this is not a reboot. An application was taking all the memory away from the SQL. SQL had dropped and all its memory was stolen and it was down to 78 megabytes or 788 megabytes of usage, and the page life expectancy was just over a minute. So the performance really dropped. And this was because something else was running on the system or the underlying hardware, and we had to work with the vendor to get through with it. So this is where it comes invaluable for identifying that kind of issues. Page life expectancy also will drop down due to heavy workloads. So you want to correlate the heavy workloads, like your index rebuilds, your used page life expectancy will drop to the bottom and then clear up. So that is acceptable in that time, but understanding how the application's going and running will let you know if you need to add more resources to the system. We already ran that one. So I have an ad hoc query that I will run, and what this does is it will give us information on our server, the product version that we're on. We're on Service Pack 1, so maybe we want to upgrade it. There's also, you can just select ADAT's version, and you will get that format. It's not as easy to load into a database as the upper line is, so that's how this is running. So it's just gathering the same information, just putting it into a cleaner format. The next information I want to look at is my SQL performance. I don't necessarily load this one into a table simply because it's variable information. It can change, but it lets me know if my log backups are not occurring. If you look at the log space used and you start seeing 80 and 90%, there's two things happening. Either a long process is going on or the transaction log backups have not been occurring on a regular basis. So that's something to be aware of and start looking into it. We gathered information on our SQL configuration so we can load it into our database. I'm looking at information from the settings for SQL, if there's anything that's a little off with it, with some bad settings. For me, bad settings is something set to auto close and auto shrink. That's a red flag for you to address. Again, you're just taking notes and gathering this information. You're not making changes right now. This is where you want to find out where your files are located. Is there room for improvement? Is everything on the C drive? If it is, it's a bad thing. In my case, my C drive's a terabyte, so I'm not going to worry about this. I want to look at when the databases were last back up. So I'm going to gather that information, and I see AdventureWorks is backed up last night, and I have current transaction logs from today, but I have a bunch of databases that are missing backups. So when you see this, you've got your information, stop and let somebody know, whoever's in charge of the backup, know that you are missing backups and you have to get those set up. So that's the exception for don't make any changes. And then again, job schedules and finding failing jobs and when things are running, gather that information. I look at I want to know what my disk space usage is. Zoom in. I want to know how much space it is in use, how much free space and free percentage. You want to know if you're going to die or run out of space on the system. So you just want to gather that information. This is all loaded. I have a job that will sit there and load the repository and run all these scripts and load it into my repository database and load the data. So just to show you that it does it. It loaded data and we've got it. I haven't run the job today, but it's got data that you can sit there and go back and slice and dice. You could do it quickly and get it going. Other information you may want to keep track of is the virtual log file sizes on the system. David Levy came up with one for identifying what the virtual log file sizes are. This is the number that is when the log files get built and expanded, there's a number of virtual log files. Too many log files, virtual log files, can affect performance, or it means that you don't have your logs backed up, so they keep growing. So it's something you want to gather metrics on and get fixed, and then do some more testing and fine-tuning of like database growth settings and processes like that. And it depends on the size of the database. So if I were to sit there and execute this, my biggest database is the MSDB with 31 rows. I'm not going to worry about that. I have seen that with 10,000 number of rows, and that's something you have to go in and then go remediate. So it's just look at and be aware of that, and then if you have to, then you can change it. Other metrics I may want to be aware of is the page life expectancy. If you just want to run this as a job itself, this will get you the current page life expectancy. Again, this number can be variable depending on the process it's running. So that's why I want to get a metric for it. Sometimes I just do it to get a quick snapshot of the information. So we know that we have backups going. But what I like to do is find out for the last 2 days how often the transaction log backups are occurring. So I see that this one, we have them going every 30 minutes. So I'm fine with that. I've seen transaction log backups be once a day. So not only do we want to make sure that the databases are fine and being backed up, we want to know the frequency is correct for the business. trending for the system, I try finding out the database growth. And this is going to be missing databases because I have more databases that aren't listed here. And the reason they're not here, because my bad database isn't in this list, because it's never been backed up. So be aware of the metrics you're gathering are limited by where you're getting the information from. This particular query is getting the information from the NSDB and the backup history. So be aware of that. The other key thing I try finding out from my databases is the index fragmentation. And that is with some soup. It has a very good script just to find out what the index fragmentation details are. That way you can understand if you need to get those indexes rebuilt a little more often. And it's just a quick report. It will let you know your average fragmentation percent for these indexes, and if maybe you need to run these processes a little more often. And then if you wish, you can add these to the existing job that I have created to gather the information. And I have a job created to load the data into the repository. If you want to add the index fragmentation to it, you can. What I normally do is I set that to be a report that runs independently and send it to me every day, and I analyze it for a few weeks to understand are there certain indexes or databases that need to be maintained more often. Any questions?
Yes. Can you explain what PLE is?
PLE is the page life expectancy. Data pages are stored in memory. So the PLE is how long those pages will stay in memory before being swapped out to disk. When it's swapped out to disk, it's using virtual memory, so it's using slower memory. So if you have a high virtual memory count and a low PLE, your database is not running as efficiently, your server is not running as efficiently as it could, and the query's performance is going to be degraded. When that occurs, you want to build some trending and analysis that you can work with your network team to sit there and say, hey, add more RAM to this system. And by trending that information and knowing that, you know, our page life expectancy of 2 hours or 4 hours is not acceptable for this production system, we need to increase that and allow the memory to stay in memory as long as it can. Then you would want to work with the network team and increase that, the amount of RAM added to the system. With a virtual system, you can do that. With a physical system, it's a little more complicated because sometimes they have to pop it open and add more RAM to the system in the physical box, and that's an outage. But usually most virtual systems, it can be just a quick reboot to add more RAM, and your outage is minimal. Sometimes they can add hot memory. Does that help?
Hopefully it does. Or sometimes you just have a really bad query that needs tuning as well. I've seen that.
Right.
So there can
and
be
that's why you want to trend.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple more questions that kind of can be combined here. How would you roll this information up into one location, and do you run reports on this data?
I do run reports on this data. In my DBA data, the database growth, I will run a weekly or a monthly report to give me trending for my client systems. So I see what the growth of the databases are, and if we need to do better disk planning for expansion, or if there's some maintenance that needs to be done where the databases are the data, is the data being archived? Do we need to go in and make some efforts to like move it to an archive and then maybe compress that data? There's different methods, but it's like Knowledge will let you know which databases you need to focus on. Because if you're dealing with a server with 30 databases and there's only 2 that have a lot of growth, this will give me the understanding of which ones I want to focus on for addressing. I run the reports and then I pull the information in the repository database. I have actually different stored procedures that I can sit there and pull the metrics. So I want to know which databases I need to address for auto close and auto shrink. So I'm going to execute my stored procedure and it will let me know that my bad database, I forgot it preloaded a couple times. Those are the ones with auto close and auto shrink on. And I know that when you auto shrink, you're going to have 2 impacts. You're going to have it shrink whenever it wants to and impact the performance of the system. And it's also going to highly fragment your indexes. When a database auto closes, it's going to sit there and have a processor intensive process where it shuts down the databases and turns it back on. I had a client system that they were experiencing horrendous performance issues. And the first thing I did was stop the databases from auto closing. Half of the performance issues went away. So I use this to load it up into a master database. And then afterwards, I run the scripts again so that I know what the changes are. The advantage is in each of these tables. So we'll go into the drives. Let's go into the SQL version. In each of these tables, there is going to be a snapshot date. It's not a timestamp, it's just the date that we gathered the information. So we know that on the day we originally gathered our information, this is the information we had. And when we make a change, we've got a different date. So on 1/11, we gathered the information on this server build, so maybe we patched it up. So because we patched it up, we want to run this again and know that on 1/13, we're up to the latest service pack and when that occurred. You can run parts of these scripts or just to update that particular information, or just rerun this script. It's a very quick running script. And it'll just update your information pretty quickly. I just loaded my entire database with all those scripts and the data, and that's my goal, is to get it to run quickly so then I can make use of the information. I made a change, this is when I made the change, and then maybe a week or 2 down the line, somebody's saying, well, you made some changes to the system. Did it have a negative impact? And you can go in and look at it and see, did you get improvement? Did you take new metrics for the memory? After change is made, you want to get more information. Does that help?
I think so. Thanks.
Okay. So we want to sit there and review our findings. So you kind of led into what I was going to talk about. You want to start at the top. The system details. Is there anything that we can do to fix it? Is it on the latest Microsoft patches? Make sure your systems are patched. Is there enough RAM and CPU to run the processes? You've already gone and looked at it. Is it sufficient for the load? Do you have SSRS, SSIS, or SSAS and have enough memory allocated? Be aware that the SSRS, IS, and AS are running off the operating system memory. So you want to take the memory from SQL to allow the other processes to be running, which is part of the problem with that other client system. There was something else running that was taking all the memory, and it was SSAS. So we had to control that. Are there other applications running on the system? By antivirus software can cause a performance issue on SQL Server. It needs to be there, but it has to exclude the SQL files. Microsoft has information on that. I believe I have a link on that to do that. Your disk usage. Multiple files. Do you need to add more drives? Are there issues with the I/O? Work with the team to do it. Get the changes made and then run your next run the metric scripts to get the new baseline. As you make changes, you want to get the new baselines. You know, look at the SQL. Is it configured? Is it sufficient for the database? Are you dealing with 1 terabyte database and 16 gig of RAM? I can tell you right now, you do not have enough RAM on your system. But getting that information on your database sizes, the file locations, is why we want to get that information. TempDB files. Do you have more than one TempDB file? If you have one processor, you have a problem for your CPU. Usually you have multiple, so you want to make sure to have enough TempDB files for the processors that you're running. Look at your settings for optimized for ad hoc workloads. These are most often overlooked. You want to look at what the settings are and understand. The max degree of parallelism is how many processors the query can be set to be used. You will go into systems and see it set for 1. If you see that, find out if it's a SharePoint system or if it is a Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics system. That you can't change, that is what it's set for. Every other one should either be set to 0 or for a certain number of processors on the system. You want to let them run with what the processors are running. Is their default fill factor set on the whole server? If it is, you're going to have some work to do to dig into the indexes and fix those settings. And sometimes you want to sit there and run different scripts to get that information. So if I go over here and I do a new query and I do SP, and I execute this, this will take a minute to run, but it will let you know if you have any indexes with fill factors on there that maybe you want to dig in deeper and see why is it set? Is it across the board? So this is letting you know you got auto close enabled. Backup's not performed recently. Fill factors changed. Bad database has one object with a fill factor of 50%. This will give you quickly the information of where to start digging next. So that's why I always like to use Brent Ozar's SQL Blitz, because it lets you know, okay, I got this information, do I need to dig deeper? This gives you the information of where to go next. And if you're not sure what it means, he has a link there that you can sit there and go to, and it'll give you more education on what to do next and how to react to this. You know, look at your database settings. Are there any shrink jobs scheduled to run on a regular basis? That's your first indication of problems where you want to get rid of those jobs. What is the log growth settings? Do you have a large VLF that's tied into the log growth settings? Is it set correct? Are there compatibility issues? Do you have someone set to be compatibility of 90 versus the server being at 2016? Then you want to go in and fix those things. But you want to work with your teams to make those changes and test them out. So what we recommend is fix the server level issues first. It's usually a one and done. So turn off processes that are not needed. That'll allow resources to go back to the server to be used. Add RAM or CPU if needed. Be aware CPU is a cost item. SQL is licensed by processors. So understand what the requirements are doing it. Make those changes, get a new baseline, get your new memory settings, make sure they're going. Patch, I cannot emphasize this enough. Patch the Windows system, patch the SQL version, and get your new baseline based on those new settings. Add the disks and split off the MDF, LDF, and TempDB. Get a new baseline on your disk performance. You want to understand that and what's going on. Document the change and the date the changes were implemented. You're doing change tracking and you want to make sure you know when it's going on. The disk I/O issues you're limited on. You have to work with your system admin team. They usually have a magic fix for disk issues. They will never tell you what they did to fix it, but they will fix it. Get a new disk speed report and keep that information. And if you start seeing performance issues later, you can sit there and gather that metrics and then again, work with your sysadmin team on performance issues. After you make your system changes, get your new baseline, then fix the SQL configurations issues next. Is the memory configured correctly? Do you have the right degree of parallelism set? Do you have the TempDB set up with the proper, it's on its own drive and the proper number of things? Document your changes after you make those changes and upload the script to load it to your repository. Next, I would fix the database growth settings. We're going for the quick wins here. Fix the BLF of the log files. You'll get some new baselines from that metrics. And then add or adjust maintenance jobs. Are you checking for corruption? Are your indexes being rebuilt on the right schedule? And do you need to occur more often on certain databases? Are the statistics being updated? Rebuild the indexes more often if they need to. You've been running reports to gather that information. Be aware SharePoint is a special case and normally handles rebuilding their own indexes and statistics automatically. So you don't want to go in and put maintenance plans on SharePoint databases. So be aware of the function of the system and the databases and what you're touching before you go making some global changes. Each system is different and unique. Your first instinct is to fix as problems are found. Stop and wait. Gather the information. If it's the backups or if the disk is about to fill up, notify right away. But everything else, you want to gather the information and you want to be cautious with your changes and wait and see what the changes are that as you make them. Each system can be different. Know the requirements and limitations for changes. Get the vendor documentation, work with that information. SharePoint is a special case. Dynamics is a special case. And know what the requirements are that you can work on this system. This is why we want to see SharePoint on its own server without anything else on it. Document your changes prior and again after they're made change. Let people know when you're making changes so that they can also test it out. I'd advise testing on your test systems first so you know the impact if you've never had to do this before, and get your new baselines. And then I also recommend, depending on your system, perform a yearly or bi-yearly or even quarterly review for the heavily used systems, because the SQL servers are not static. Things changes, databases changes, database grows. Query plans get put in place that have a new impact on it. So you want to make sure when they're going. Don't make any changes during the business day, and track your changes as you go along. These are the references. I'll include them in my slide deck. And any questions?
No more questions right now. I do want to remind everybody that we will have the video posted, and I'll get all the information from Lowry and get it posted on our website, wit.pass.org. And that should all happen within a day or two, if you want to go out and check that. So, yeah, I don't see any other questions. People are saying thank you, and really some great information. I think everybody has learned something today. So
Then my goal has been met.
yes, thank you very, very much, and I'm looking forward to posting all the information.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.